Good afternoon, all attendees of our Proclamation 2021 initial webinar. This is Kelly Calloway. I'm Senior Director of Instructional Materials. This is our first webinar regarding Proclamation 2021, which is a proclamation calling for pre-kindergarten systems. So it's a very different kind of proclamation for us and possibly for some of you than what we have been used to over the past 10 years. And it's going to be a real learning experience for all of us. We don't have all the answers for you yet regarding Proclamation 2021. In fact, we don't even have all the questions yet regarding Proclamation 2021. So we're really hoping that the result of today's webinar will be a bunch of questions from you guys that will help us determine various and sundry things that still need to be decided regarding exactly what we're asking for in Proclamation 2021. So I want to strongly encourage you to participate with lots and lots of questions, or to participate after the fact with lots of questions. And Amy, who is going to be talking here in just a moment, will give you more detail about exactly how to do that. So I will come back at the end of the webinar and hopefully be able to answer at least a few of the questions that you asked during the course of the webinar, or at least say thanks for listening. In the meantime, I'm going to hand the microphone and the screen over to Amy, who has the bulk of the information that we hope you will find very, very useful in the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour. Thanks. Amy?
Thanks for that introduction, Kelly. So I have a series of poll questions. I just want to find out who we have in the audience today. So if you're a publisher, please select the role that best describes your position. So it looks like we have a good mix of different responsibilities there. So welcome, publishers. We're happy to have you. For those of you who aren't publishers, if you represent a district or campus, please take a look at the list and select your role. And from the district side, it looks like the bulk of participants are textbook coordinators, but we also have some department heads and administrators. So welcome to all of our district and campus staff. And I suspect there might be some of you that aren't from a district or a publisher. So if that's the case, please take a look at poll question number 3 and select your role or affiliation. All right, it looks like everyone is either from a district or a publisher. So we'll go ahead and close that one and get started. So I plan to answer the following questions during our time together. First, how is the proclamation organized? What are the adoption requirements? How is this proclamation unique compared to those that have come before it? What feedback do you have? And what happens next? But before we talk about how Proclamation 2021 is organized, I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions. How many of you have already read the draft version of Proclamation 2021? This is the version that was presented to the State Board of Education for discussion last month. And it looks like about 2/3 of you have already done your homework and read the draft. And for the rest of you, I will be providing an introduction, and hopefully you can read it after the webinar. Now this one, I'm going to have you answer a little bit differently. Just enter into the questions box something that you hope to learn today. Lots of questions about language requirements, wanting to know about the process, people's responsibilities, format requirements. Good. I think that we will be able to answer a lot of these questions throughout the presentation, and some of them dive a little deeper into the proclamation than we plan to go today, but we'll try to get to as many of these as possible. Thank you so much for sharing. So the proclamation has 6 sections: an introduction, an adoption timeline, deliverables and requirements, student enrollment and content standards, ethical standards, and a glossary. In the introduction, you'll find specific courses and grade levels for which instructional materials are being called, which in this case is pre-K, general publisher eligibility requirements, the types of submissions that will be accepted, when the materials will go into the classroom, and the applicable statute and rule. The adoption timeline actually begins today with the release of this webinar and ends in August 2021 when the materials will go into classrooms. In the timeline, you'll notice deadlines for schools, ESCs, the public, publishers, and TEA. It'll also tell you who's responsible for meeting those deadlines and who's going to receive the deliverable. To provide you with a visual, here's a couple of snips from the adoption timeline. And you can see a lot of icons, and each icon is assigned to a specific party. All of the items in the adoption timeline appear in chronological order. The deliverables and requirements section is actually broken into two subsections, one for publishers and another for ESCs. The items in this section are in alphabetical order, and this is where you'll find more details about the activities and deliverables that you see on the adoption timeline. The next section provides enrollment data from this school year and a link to the Texas Pre-Kindergarten Guidelines. Then you'll find information about the ethical standards of state review panel members and publishers. For example, reviewers are now in a no contact period, which means they cannot communicate with publishers. And finally, you'll find the glossary. Ordinarily, I'm sure you don't read the glossary of a publication from beginning to end, but in this case, I'm actually going to encourage you to do so because it's really important to understand the lingo. I think you might find that we use words slightly differently than you may be used to, or you may encounter words that are unfamiliar. So you can refer back to the glossary to get more information about that. Now, I'm going to ask you another question. If you're a publisher, let me know if you have materials currently adopted by the SBOE. And it looks like the distribution here is very similar to those of you who've already read the proclamation. We have close to 2/3 who have materials currently adopted and some of you who don't. So welcome back to those of you already on the list, and welcome to those of you who are first timers. We're happy to have all of you. So I mentioned before that the introduction specifies adoption requirements, and I want to delve a little deeper into those requirements. In order to be eligible for adoption, the instructional materials must cover at least 50% of the standards, be suitable for pre-K students, be reviewed by academic experts, comply with applicable manufacturing standards, and be error-free. The SBOE will accept submissions of brand new instructional materials that were developed specifically to align to the TPG, or existing materials that were retrofitted, for lack of a better word, to align to the TPG. If you're a publisher who has materials on the adoption bulletin for pre-K, and you want to keep those materials on the adoption list, you're going to have to follow some special requirements. You can submit your currently adopted materials along with any new or supplemental components that you need to address the updated standards. And to continue selling those currently adopted materials, once Proclamation 2021 materials are adopted, you have to provide new correlations that are aligned to the updated standards. If you don't want to keep selling the materials that are currently adopted and you just want to start from scratch and submit something new, then you don't have to follow those special requirements. Your first major due date is going to be right around the first of the year on Monday, January 6th. So if you're a publisher interested in submitting pre-K materials, you must submit a statement of intent to bid, which is a simple, non-binding notice of your intent to participate in the proclamation, and a company information form, which provides us with the information we need to contact you. After you submit your statement of intent to bid, you'll have a few months until you're required to provide TEA and each of the ESCs with samples of your materials. These samples, unlike other recent proclamations, must be in a format that matches the format that will be provided to districts. Along with your sample, you'll be required to submit correlations, which show how your materials align to the TPG. And before you submit those things, you need to conduct a thorough editorial review of your materials to identify and correct as many errors as possible. Once you submit your sample materials, you're required to document every change you make. So it's really in your best interest to get as many of those edits done ahead of time as possible. All materials, whether they're print or digital, must be accessible to students with disabilities. And all digital materials must incorporate the machine readable TPG, sorry. I'm really used to saying TEKS. And all adopted publishers must agree to an 8-year fixed price contract. So let's talk about what makes Proclamation 2021 unique. We've worked really hard to be responsive to feedback we've received from the field. So you'll find that the information has been streamlined, and we've added icons in the adoption timeline for those of you who are more visual. So I've already shown you what that looks like. We've also linked the deliverables in the timeline to the description of that deliverable in the deliverables and requirements section. And I'm going to see if I'm able to show you that. If you'll bear with me. So what I wanted to show you is in the adoption timeline, if I want to know about, say, the statement of intent to bid, I can click there and it goes right to that section in the deliverables and requirements section that tells me what a statement of intent to bid is. So that is one thing that we did that's new and different for 2021. We also have a chart that helps you sort out what you need to do for the different sample types. So I'll show you there what we mean. Just back up a few pages. So sometimes it's hard to tell which requirements apply to which type of sample. So we've created this chart so that you can have a quick reference to what you're supposed to be doing and when. So the materials need to be accessible to students with disabilities in both the pre and post-adoption versions. For example, electronic versions are not required in either sample, but they are allowed. The machine readable TPG is required in the post-adoption sample. So that's just another feature that we've added. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think. Specifically, I'm curious if there's any requirements that you don't understand, or if any of those requirements will be particularly burdensome. And I'd love to hear your feedback on the new format, especially whether it makes it easier or harder to find the information that you're looking for. Before I turn it over to Kelly, I'm going to have you take one last shot at entering information into the questions box. You can either continue entering your questions for Kelly or tell us something that you learned today through the webinar. So what happens next? We want you to keep sending in your questions and your feedback about the draft of the proclamation.
So this is Kelly, and I want to apologize because I'm just jumping in because we didn't plan this, but we can't always plan everything. I just want to, I thought it might be useful at this time to stop and address some of the questions that have come in before we go any further, if that's okay with you.
Let's do it.
Okay. So here are a few, and some of them I'm going to call on you for.
Okay.
The first one that I know we can address right now that might put people's minds at ease a little bit, and I've got about 6 of these that I've collected from what's just been coming in. The first one is, how will the IMQE process impact this adoption? And the answer is that it won't. The IMQE process, for those of you who are familiar with that term, is completely separate from the State Board of Education's adoption process. So it is certainly possible that the IMQE process will include pre-kindergarten systems at some point in the future, but that process never, at this time, the answer to that is that that process never affects the State Board of Education's adoption. So you need to, those of you publishers who have an understanding, at least a general understanding of the IMQE process, separate that in your mind from the state board adoption process. So what we're talking about here today is the State Board of Education adoption process, not connected in any way to the IMQE process. More information will be forthcoming about the IMQE process and its connection, if any, to pre-kindergarten systems. But for right now, the simple answer is that has no effect on state board adoption. The second question that I thought we could address right now to save us a little bit of stress is there any expectation that the pre-kindergarten guidelines will be updated between now and your submissions? No. Those have been recently updated, and everything that we're providing you is based on those recently updated guidelines. So you should not anticipate any changes in those guidelines between now and your provision of either pre-adoption or post-adoption samples. The next three questions might be better addressed by Amy. Let me take one of them. What are the standards for materials accessibility for students with disabilities? Any print material that gets adopted by the State Board of Education must be reproducible by us in Braille, large print, and audio formats. So if your product is adopted, you will be required to provide us with certain files that allow us to do that. I could spend a little bit of time talking about online products, but I think that's so rare with pre-kindergarten systems that it's probably not worth our time at this point. The other two questions I'm going to send off to Amy. What are machine-readable TEKS, or in this case, machine-readable pre-kindergarten guidelines? And do you have a sample state of intent to bid template that you can share with us? So I'm going to turn those two questions over to Amy and then encourage her to just move ahead with her presentation.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. I pulled up the proclamation so that you guys can see the pages, page 14 and 15 that deal with some of the accessibility compliance information. But in terms of the machine readable TPG, basically those are a set of tags, data tags for lack of a better word. I know I'm not using the right technical term, but basically a code that behind the scenes, as you are tagging your content to say that it aligns to the standards, you'll tag it using, or the programmers will tag it using the TPG. And so there, you could just search machine readable TEKS on the internet and you'll be taken to the Texas Gateway. You can create a free user account and then access already all of the documents required to start working on machine readable TPG with your product. So if you have a digital product and you're tagging your content, which that's one of the advantages of having a digital product, is that it makes it easy to load into the learning management system, and districts can go in and say, what do I have that addresses this standard? And if everybody's using the same tags, then all the materials will be talking the same language, and the district would get a full list of materials that they have that address that standard. So hopefully that gives you a little clue about machine readable TPG. We're definitely going to talk in more detail about it in the publisher orientation, which will happen before the statements of intent to bid are due. And speaking of statement of intent to bid, I don't have a template that I can show you because it's actually in EMAT, but what I can do is I will show you the publisher portal, and if you were to try to get there on your own, you could hover over academics on the TEA webpage, and over here on the left-hand side, close to the bottom, you would click on Publisher Portal. And if you're just curious about the Statement of Intent to Bid in general, you can look at the Proclamation 2020 Statement of Intent to Bid training that's posted, and you can get a glimpse at what that looks like. Let me see if in the PDF, if I have any screenshots. No, I don't have a screenshot of it. Sorry, folks. But if you want to watch the training, at least they'll tell you what types of information we're looking for, and it really is very basic. You're just using this to throw your name into the hat to say you want to participate. And I did see a question about, is it true that they're not due until January, because typically they're due in December, and the answer is yes. The deadline was moved to January. All right, so back to what you should be doing next. We want you to keep submitting your questions and feedback. Thank you for everybody who's been typing into the questions box. We'll certainly capture all of those and prepare responses or submit them to the SBOE for their response. We encourage you to watch the meeting next month. That will be broadcast on the web, and I'm going to go back over here and show you how to get to those. So on the TEA website, if you were to hover over About TEA and click on State Board of Education, you can see the meeting here, and you would just click on live stream. And if a meeting were happening, then, well, there's one for charter applicants, but if a meeting were happening, then you'd be able to find that meeting here and watch it. If you tune in too late, you're always able to watch an archived version of that. So we also want you to look for the SBOE's official responses to questions in their questions and answers document, which is scheduled to be issued in September. And then I already mentioned the publisher orientation, but we certainly hope that you plan to attend the publisher orientation, and that is where we really dive deep into the specific requirements, especially those that happen from the time you submit your statement of intent to bid to the state review panel meetings in the summer. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly in case she wants to respond to any other questions.
No, not at this time, but thank you. And I probably will interrupt you at another appropriate stopping point, if that's okay, to deal with a few other questions that have come in.
Well, we're really almost to the end. I just wanted to give you our phone number, 512-463-9601. You're welcome to call us anytime. We're happy to walk through the process in more detail or answer specific questions. You can also email them to us at review.adoption@tea.texas.gov. And you can visit our website to find more information about the review and adoption process. I've already shown you the publisher portal, but that's where we keep all of the information that we think is relevant to publishers, or at least we try to, and we update that information very frequently. So check back there for updates. And I'm going to turn it back to Kelly for real.
Okay, so Amy, thank you. I did not realize that we were quite that close to the end, and otherwise I would have gone ahead and handled these questions, but that's my fault. Let me go ahead and take about 5 more questions, and I'll keep watching for new ones that pop in that we can answer. The first one, since the last time we dealt with questions, will this proclamation include health education? No, that has been determined. We're not quite as far along as we thought we might be when that cycle was published. So we are aware of the fact that our website currently says that Proclamation 2021 is expected to include health, but the health TEKS revisions aren't as far along as we thought they would be. So health education will not be part of Proclamation 2021. The next question is, will this call be for systems in both English and Spanish? And I'm going to give you a qualified answer. systems in both English and Spanish are always welcome. We all know that districts appreciate that. We all know we have a very large Spanish-speaking population in the state of Texas, but whether or not the proclamation will actually call for Spanish products is something that we will be asking the board at their meeting in June. So I know Amy has already shown you how to access that meeting and encouraged you to watch that meeting, and I'm just going to reiterate that encouragement. The next 3 questions, Amy, I believe might be for you. And the first one, and I'm going to take them one at a time. Where is the draft of Proclamation 2021? Can you show them how to find that?
Of course. So you can find that a couple of ways, but the easiest way is to look on the Proclamations page. So I've hovered over Academics and click on Proclamations. And each proclamation has its own section. Right now, since all we have is the draft, Proclamation 2021 doesn't have its own page, but you would just click right there. It would download the proclamation and open as a PDF.
The next question, Amy, is a little more technical. How many printed copies will be needed for adoption samples on June 6th? I'm assuming this refers specifically to pre-adoption samples that the review committees will be reviewing next summer, but I don't have that June 6th date in my head, so I'm going to ask you to address that question.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe if we meant April 6th, which is when the pre-adoption samples are due, or June or July for state review panel meetings. So I'm going to just answer both. For the pre-adoption samples, you're going to need to send 1 to TEA and 1 to each of the 20 education service centers. So that is a total of 21 pre-adoption samples in whatever format you intend to send to districts. When we get to the review, this is going to be my first time reviewing pre-K materials. So I might share my response with Kelly. She might have to chime in here, but you'll have at least or up to 5 reviewers at a table. And so we just need to ensure that those reviewers have access to the materials. And I'm not sure that that would mean 5 full kits, or if you can provide less than that, Kelly, question mark?
Yeah, that's a good question. The last time we reviewed pre-K systems was, I believe, in the summer of 2009, possibly 2010. So it's been a while, and we were still learning at that point, and we will be learning at this point. So I'm going to ask for your patience in a really specific answer to that. We kind of need to understand what those pre-K systems involve. We do understand that they are a little more interesting than traditional textbooks. And so it's certainly going to be understandable if your kit needs to be shared in some way by the table as a whole. So give us a little bit of time to discuss those specifics with publishers and do a little bit of research before we answer that question. Let me go on to a few more that have come in since I made that list. The publisher orientation in September is a webinar also, question mark? Yes, it will also be a webinar. So it will also be taped. You will have a chance to submit questions. We will make it available to you online. Speaking of online, another question that has come in that we can probably address is how soon after this date will the recording of this webinar be available? So I'm going to refer that one to Amy and then ask her to send me back the microphone so that I can answer a few more.
We should be able to have the recording available within the next couple days, but by the end of the week at the latest.
Great. The next question is a little bit nuanced, so I want to talk about it just a tad. The question is, will you have a rubric that can be shared with publishers? Because the State Board of Adoption process does not include quality review, we do not have a rubric for evaluating quality of products. What we have instead is an evaluation instrument that itemizes out all of the TEKS, or as in this case, the pre-kindergarten guidelines. So your product is checked off against all of those itemized pre-kindergarten guidelines to ensure that you have provided in your product appropriate coverage of each and every one of those. And so that is, I'm not going to call it a rubric because I'm a teacher and that's not a rubric, but that is what we use in place of a rubric to determine your coverage percentage, which is it is then used to determine whether or not the State Board of Education adopts your product. So I hope that helps a little bit. We'll be providing greater detail on that question when the proclamation is actually submitted, when the proclamation is actually adopted by the State Board, and as we move further along in the process.
Kelly, may I chime in?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that on the publisher portal, if you're just really curious about that instrument, you can watch the Proclamation 2020 correlation training, as long as you remember that that one was specifically for 2020 and the high school English, language arts and reading TEKS, but the process itself is going to be very similar. So if you just wanted to preview that, you can find the correlation training on the publisher portal.
Great. So I think that unless I've just accidentally missed one, I think those are the questions for which we have a quick and ready answer at this time. But please know that we will be keeping all of your questions and working on whether or not we can answer them and how we can answer them in the coming weeks. And we will certainly take any of those questions that we feel like need to be taken to the State Board of Education. As Amy said, they are scheduled to issue a question and answer document in September. And so that will hopefully be sort of the final set of answers, although nothing's ever final, because we continue to take questions and try to provide helpful answers as long as we possibly can. Just one last question. This one just came in. At the last pre-K adoption, each guideline needed to be covered at least 5 times throughout the year. Will the same 5 times be a part of this evaluation? The rules have changed since that adoption, and so they are different. That 5 times rule is no longer in place. Different rules are in place, and those different rules are covered pretty thoroughly, I think, in the proclamation itself. And so I would encourage you to turn to the proclamation, as Amy has said, and read it carefully, and then let us know what more specific questions you have. That said, I think that may be the last question that I can feel comfortable answering right here, right now. So I'm going to thank you all again for your participation, and I'm going to thank you in advance for the questions that you will continue to submit to us to help us continue to hone this process and make it more user-friendly for you and more effective for Texas school students. And then I'm going to just turn things back over to Amy in case she has any last minute words.
Thanks, Kelly. I don't have any last minute words other than to just reiterate what Kelly said. Thank you so much for your participation, and please, please, please don't hesitate to contact us if you have more questions. Thank you.